computer is working on it. Oh, I think we're there. Right, great. Hi, CAM followers. Lovely to have you this evening. I hope everyone is well. We have the most lovely Danielle Beck with us this evening, and we're going to be talking about how to help when we've got either surgery approaching or lameness, and we're going to try and help rest and keep our animals as calm as possible throughout that period, particularly post-operative, and things we can do to prepare them for surgery. If you've got an animal that's about to undergo a procedure and you're really worried about the post-operative rest period, and we're going to go through some really handy tips and methods to try and make that as stress-free for everyone as possible. I just would like to see if I can get this to work, and I'll go through this. Yeah, it seems to be working. I just would really like to thank Big Barker for sponsoring this. They've been really supportive to CAM since the beginning, and we really love their ethics. We're really proud to be associated with this company because they really actually work hard to show that their beds work. We all know the difference that a good mattress can make, and it's the same for our dogs. And many of the CAM team actually have the Big Barker beds, and apparently some of them have fallen asleep on them because they're so nice. So thank you very much, Big Barker. Oh, I've made us big.
There we go.
Right, okay. So if you'd like to introduce yourself, Danielle, and then we'll get started chatting about things we can do to make life a bit easier for us when we're going through these periods with our dogs.
Yeah, absolutely. So as mentioned, I'm Danielle. I am a registered clinical animal behaviourist. I have a really big speciality, special interest, it's not a speciality, in pain and behaviour, mostly for my own dogs. So my primary work is dogs that have like aggression type issues, which the majority of my caseload ends up being pain related. And I just think it's really important that we teach dogs how to learn how to manage themselves in all aspects of their life. So when it comes to something like surgery, they're able to actually manage it. So going through that process with my own dog kind of helps spur it on. And then my experience as a clinical animal behaviourist, I've been doing that for about, nearly 20 years now in dog training, clinical work for about 6 years. And that just kind of helps bring a whole different level of behaviour knowledge to where we are now to help move that forward. And I'm a really big advocate for CAMS because you guys just do amazing work and just help push that forward. So it's a little bit about me for everyone watching.
Lovely, great. And I know this is a massive issue because almost on a day-to-day basis, we'll get clients that come in with lame animals. We're going along that course of either this is definitely going to need surgery or this is likely to need surgery in the not too distant future. And one of the things that is quite scary is that already it's difficult to rest an animal, mainly because on the first day or so it's easy because they're sore, so they'll rest, that's fine. But as soon as they start to feel better, they'll go running down the garden chasing a squirrel or running off in the park or have a funny 5-minute zoomies, and then suddenly all that hard work is undone because that damage has been redone. And so it becomes an issue right from the beginning of how on earth do we deal with a really especially exuberant, hyperactive young dog that has otherwise been really well. How on earth, and it's a real nightmare for clients. So how do you kind of start this process off? Where do you start?
Well, with my own dog, I'll use the best example because when he had his first surgery on his knees, he was 8 months old and he's a mini American Shepherd. So he's a high drive working breed, 8-month-old teenager, like so full of life. And before his surgery, you wouldn't know that there was anything wrong with him. It was purely because I was like, there's a little bit of something going on. And we didn't know any wiser. But what we had been doing with him that I like to teach all dogs is how to switch off. So teaching them a really good settle. We like to call it like chill out because it's different to kind of asking your dog to sit and stay. You know, we can teach dogs to settle in like a stay. So it's a go to this place and stay there until you're told otherwise. And they'll go and they'll do it. And there's nothing wrong with that. But what we kind of do with our clients is try and teach the dogs to voluntarily learn how to switch off themselves. Because there's a difference between being told what to do and being able to do it yourself. Yeah. And if the dogs can actually learn how to manage themselves and regulate their own breathing rate. So when they start to feel a bit bored or irritable, they're able to just go, if in doubt, chill out, essentially. But then they can just kind of go, okay, I can't get what I want. And rather than having a big frustration burst about it, they've got the tools to be able to deal with that. So starting with frustration tolerance training early, where they learn that they can't always get what they want when they want. So the simple exercises where you start off with just delayed gratification. So just withholding a treat for a little bit, or kind of getting them to wait for something, and then moving on to, you can't have that, but you can have this, and allowing them to kind of choose. So rather than us asking them to do things all the time and doing that micromanagement, we're kind of waiting for them to make the right choice and rewarding that. And it's kind of building that up gradually and slowly, so these animals are able to kind of switch off and deal with the fact that they have to rest and they have to relax, and give them other kind of more stimulating things to do that more low energy. So all the scent work exercises and slow motion searching that is a bit easier is kind of where we want to start. But teaching them a good switch off voluntarily is a best thing. Sometimes it has to be cued to start with, but that's where I start with a lot of dogs, is are they able to do nothing at the moment, and have a bit of a trial with dogs. We just kind of sit with them, like have them on a lead and put your foot on the lead, not enough that it's going to be tight on them, but so it's kind of loose enough so it limits their options. How long does it take for them to actually settle down? You know, will they kind of struggle a little bit and then go, okay, I'll just sit here and wait? Or do they have a bit of a temper tantrum? If they do, then that's a dog that you need to get extra help and support with, because they're going to really struggle with that barrier frustration if they're being confined to a crate or an area. Whereas the ones that are able to settle better, they have that frustration tolerance, so they're able to actually work through it, which makes the crate rest and the limited exercise process a lot easier, because they're able to go, I can't get what I want. That's okay. I'll let it go and just settle and relax myself down.
Yeah, almost teaching them self-control, which is
absolutely
actually a basis for lots of things. It'd be very helpful. Yeah. Brilliant. Right, I'll just stop there, just because I know we've got some people watching. If you have any questions throughout this, pop them down, so post them below or whatever, and we'll try and go through them at the end or as we're going, as it seems, because it'll be really interesting to see. I'm sure there are lots of people watching who have either been through this or going through it or about to go through it. So if you do have any questions, just post them down and we'll try and go through them for you. I'm just going to have a little look at my little cheat sheet.
That's okay. Otherwise, I'll just keep rambling.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Please go ahead, because there's so many different questions. I think actually, just while you're saying that, I think one of the things that is a bit of a misconception, and a lot of things that people are tempted to do, is to go straight for the crate. But it's just going to be 6 to 8 weeks crate rest, and just like basic like prison for them, and how frustrating that can be. And then obviously the process of opening that crate is going to be at the whole next level of
absolutely. Yeah, so I mean, what we did with our dog, and what I kind of recommend to people, is teach them to relax and settle in a crate, but you want to kind of teach them kind of crate rules. So it's go in the crate and you kind of practice your settling with like the Kongs and the chews, and then you go in them and get them to wait a little bit, and then introduce a Kong, and then wait a bit more, and then a Kong, and a bit more, and then get a Kong. So they start to learn to relax in there. But more importantly, when you go to open the crate door, if you move towards the crate door and the dog gets up, just wait for them to kind of just pause and move back. They don't have to sit. They don't have to get the bum all the way to the back. They just have to pause, so it's not a rush. As you start to open the door, if they move forward, just close it again and have a lead ready. So we're able to open the door and get a lead on our dog as soon as you open the crate before they've had surgery, because that's a really key point afterwards, is you want to make sure that when you come over to that crate to let them out, that you don't have them wiggling around and dancing, essentially. So you can just get a lead on them, so you can take them out into the garden on a lead for the toilet, because we don't want those rushing off and zoomies. The other option, the one that I prefer, is to kind of have a crated area that they can rest in, but kind of pen off like a little corner of your house if you're able to, because then you restrict their movement, but they're not stuck to a small one. And this will depend on the surgery, so go for the recommendations of your vet over which one is safer to do so, because you're still limiting their ability to run around, but they can still walk and they can still move and shuffle enough, because for some crates, some dogs, they can't really move, and if you've had surgery, sometimes they need to stretch out a bit more than they would do, or they want a different surface to lie on depending on how comfortable it is. So we kind of penned off like a corner in our house and had we had a fabric crate, because I kind of preferred them, and we didn't have to worry about any kind of breakthroughs, because he had that frustration, self-control that you mentioned. And then we would kind of go over there and stroke him and sit in there on the floor with him. And once he was kind of relaxed, we'd then use house lines. So we would bring him out of that area, so he wasn't confined to this area 24 hours a day. So if we can't supervise him, that's where he goes, where he's limited and he's safe. The rest of the time he was on the house line, and that's just like a really thin, long puppy line. So he would come over to the sofa and we'd pick him up and put him on the sofa next to us, or he'd be on the bed on the floor by us. And the lead was there just to stop him from running off and playing with the other dog. It's even worse if you have two dogs, because the other dog will be like, come on, let's play. And your dog will want to play, and you need to make sure that you can manage that. So you have to do this kind of work with both dogs, because the other one has to learn that they can't come up and keep asking this one to play. And we don't want to end up with any accidents, because a dog that's in pain might be more likely to snap. They might be more likely to guard some items. So we have to be very wary of that. And I really love puppy lines for that, because it helps to build in that restriction. And if you've done the kind of settle and self-control exercise with using a lead, where you can put your foot on the lead and the dog learns, okay, in this situation, there's nothing interesting going on, so I might as well just lie down and chill out with a chew or a Kong or something like that. It helps build that context. But this line means that nothing interesting is going on, so just chill out with my owner. And just lots of time just being relaxing with them, and have them sitting next to you in just gentle strokes. So that becomes the normal thing for them to do, and that's their expectation in that situation. And it's a lot of it with these young dogs, it's managing those expectations. The more they can predict what's going to happen, the less anxiety there is. And if they don't expect playtime or fun time and things, and they expect that this is a calming situation, then we're not going to have too many frustration bursts from them, because they're already able to calm, and it helps that emotional regulation. It's really difficult for our teenage dogs, because they struggle with that anyway. But the more we can practice and utilize what we've got, so either cornering things off, using puppy lines, it just helps to restrict their movement. So they're still essentially on crate rest, but not necessarily trapped in the crate, because it depends on how your dog can handle that. Some of them just need the comfort and the cuddles of their parents. Others want to be left alone and would rather go to the crate, and choice is a huge option. And that's where it's really important to know your dog and what they prefer. Are they a dog that when they feel sorry for themselves, they come to the handlers and go, can I just lie next to you? And you're like, fine. Or are they ones that go, I'm not feeling too well, leave me alone, I'm going to take myself off to my little bed area.
Okay. So if we say we're in that process of anticipating surgery,
mm-hmm.
or to be honest, with any young dog, because this is going to be something that is a skill or a lesson or something they can learn that to us will be useful in any situation anyway. So, for example, going to the vets, an ultra exuberant dog, absolutely lovely, they're bouncing all over the place, really difficult to examine. So I think this initial training technique sounds like it's going to be incredibly helpful just overall.
Yeah.
Building up the trust with them, building up this calming environment and a way for them to learn, right, now's the time to be calm. So that's the first kind of step, really.
Yeah, especially if you can build them in when they're young, that there's a room in the house that isn't a playtime. So when we're in this room, we relax. So everyone in the room is just relaxed and settled. The dog's limited on their movement, so they can't go and steal the toilet roll tube or a tissue or a sock or something like that. And then if they do start playing, it's okay, let's go out the room and we'll play out the room. So they get like, this room is a playtime, this one's the relaxing one. If you got like a limited house, that's where the leads can come in handy. Because if I'm on my house line, then it's not playtime. When you clip my lead off, then it's playtime. And dogs are very context specific learners. This is relatively easy stuff to start with. But it does depend on how well your dog can cope with frustration tolerance and how much self-control they have, as to how much of these exercises you kind of need to do with them beforehand, so they're able to just relax and switch off around these times.
Okay. And when you're talking about using a house line, would it be a specific lead, not the same lead you'd take them on a walk on with?
No, you want I don't have an example of one on me. They're like puppy lines. They're usually about 2 meters long. They're really, really thin, very lightweight. And there's no kind of handle on the ends. They're not going to get caught on furniture, or not as likely to get caught on furniture. There'll always be an exception to the rule. So it's a different lead. It's a lot longer. It's a lighter one. So the dog starts to learn, when this lead is on, we're not going outside. When they're outside the lead's on, that's when they're going outside. So again, it's feeding into that context. And because it's nice and lightweight on them, it feels different to them on their collar or on their harness, whichever one you want to put it on. Yeah. And if we get used to them just learning to do that, and I find the leads are a nice way to help them learn about being restricted in their movements, because you can vary it and go, okay, I'm going to give you a meter's worth of play, and I can give you some toys or a Kong or something in here, and you can be within this area, but you can't go over there. So you're going to get a bit of frustration because they can't run around, but they can do things there. And then you start to build on that. until they're able to go, okay, when I've got this on, I'm limited, but it's okay and I can cope with it.
Yeah, that sounds really good. It sounds really useful. Almost, I can only compare it to almost like a guide dog. When you put that lead on, that's it. That is for a certain reason, for a certain job.
Yeah, it's
Sorry,
what I teach to my assistants.
I'm really sorry. I'm just going to turn my laptop on because it's about to die.
Oh no!
There we go. Sorry, I thought I'd stop it before it decides to turn itself off.
Right. It's a technique that I use because I only train my assistants' dogs, and it's what I use to kind of teach my dogs when we're out and about, that when we're cueing or we're doing something and we're waiting for something, that it doesn't involve them. So if my foot's on their lead, they just kind of go, oh, okay, and they'll either sit down or they'll just lie down and just wait, because they know that whenever that happens, it means that whatever's going on in the environment doesn't involve them. It's not a dog related thing. So they just sit and watch the world go by, or choose to go to sleep. And it's the same sort of principle. And if we can teach the young dogs to do this before they have their surgery, it means that they're able to cope better with that restriction of not being able to move around as freely as they want to. And they've got that expectation of, okay, we're just chilling out now. And the calmer we can get them before surgery, the less kind of hyperactive we have. Sometimes people are like, oh, it's the last walk, so let's kind of take them out and give them really, really good runs. And then you're just flooding them full of chemicals that make them less likely to want to sleep. Whereas if you start calming things down and doing shorter walks and more sniffy walks and resting more in the house, and start to change the game so the play style starts to become a little bit lower, and doing kind of more kind of self-control kind of games like mousy, if anyone knows that one, where you kind of got a treat in your hand and you kind of flick it out to them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think I've heard of that.
It's a nice one because you kind of wait for them to kind of pause, and they have to think and they have to move back, and then they can pounce on it. But it's quite a static game for a lot of dogs, depending on how far you flick the treat. Mm-hmm. And it's one that you can help them. It's what I use personally to get medication into my dogs. So I'll put the tablet in them so they get fast treats during this game, and because they expect the other one, they swallow, so they don't choose. They're not investigating the tablet. So I can get the pain meds down them, and it's just giving them little things like that to work through, so they're able to cope. Because of how well a dog will cope with the crate rest depends purely usually on their frustration tolerance level, and that's something that we can teach them ideally before they go in for the surgery.
Yeah. When you're training with regards to just building up that patience element of this, when you've got them and you kind of get them into that state where they're nice and calm, is that when you go for the classic reward, just so they know they're doing the right thing? Or is it just a case of letting them be so they know you can be calm right now?
Absolutely. Sometimes if you reward too soon, sometimes you'll kind of get them back into a working mode, and that's not what we want. So if it's a dog that is kind of, if they're nice and relaxed and they're just leave them, because being relaxed itself is the reward. For some dogs that struggle, then it's okay, once you show me you can relax, then I'll release you and we'll go and do some work, or we'll go and play a game, and then we'll pause the game, we'll put you back on the lead, we'll wait for you to settle down. So for them, the reward is the release. Is that if you can calm yourself down, I'll release you, we can go and play. If you can calm yourself down, I'll release you, you can go and play. So they start to, okay, so I just have to wait for my release. And while they're waiting, they'll be able to work through their own frustrations and go, okay, well, I'll do what I want while I'm waiting. And they'll sit there for a bit. And eventually you'll hear that telltale kind of teenage huff where they kind of go, and then they kind of lie down. And that's where you know that they've worked through it and they're happy to stay wherever they are for a while. Yeah. So it's helping them work through that.
Just to get that period. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got that kind of like beginnings of preparation.
Yeah.
And now we're going to have some occasions where, say with a sudden cruciate ligament rupture, something that's, you've got a disease joint already.
Yeah.
They've been coping for a long time, and it's not been on something that they've really thought was on the cards, particularly surgery. And so they've not had this preparation, but they're going to need to go into surgery, and potentially quite quickly. So they've not had that preparation. What sort of advice would you give to people who've not been able to do that period as they're approaching surgery and the immediate afterwards?
I would want to do a little bit of a test with the dog so they know before surgery what their frustration tolerance levels are like. And there's a really simple test that you can do. I have a video of it. I'm not sure if I can share my screen or I can just explain it. And you basically hold some food in your hand. And it's a very classic thing of having some food and waiting for the dog to back away. which most of us have done, is some form of self-control thing. The change with the test is as the dog backs away, you treat them kind of round at your side.
Okay, yeah.
So they start to learn, okay, if I move away from this hand, I get a treat over here. And if they stay here, they keep getting food. So the food just kind of continually flows essentially from this side. And what you'll find is a dog that has frustration tolerance will go, oh, awesome, I'm getting loads of food over here. And they'll start to hang out here and they'll start sitting and waiting and pay no attention to this hand anymore. And they'll just accept this one. For dogs that don't have that frustration tolerance, they'll keep coming back to this hand. And they'll be like, that's great, I'm getting food over here, but I still want that. And they'll start nudging this hand, they'll start pawing this hand, they'll start looking at it, they'll edge towards here, but they'll keep coming back. So if your dog starts to do that, then you're like, okay, this is one where we need to do a little bit of work. So when you're starting to restrict them, they're the dogs where I would want them on a lead rather than a crate to begin with, and to have very short kind of little sessions, because they're ones that can't cope with frustration very well. So if they're forced into a thing where they're going to get frustrated, their frustration burst is going to get really, really high, really, really quickly, and then they're likely to do themselves a mischief and damage themselves. So that's where if they're kind of going to bark heavily, they might scratch at the barrier, and that's where they're going to hurt themselves after surgery. So if we find out where the level is first and go, okay, you're a dog that's not going to be able to cope with frustration very well. So let's make sure that we can set up the environment to keep them as, give them the amount of opportunities possible where they're not going to be frustrated. So it's making sure that they're with you. So go for like the lead method rather than the strict crate rest. And after the surgery, because they are kind of coming down from sedation, the first day or so usually isn't too bad. But that's a good time to get them into that routine. However, if we're here and utilizing things like frozen Kongs or chews, things that are safe for them to have after surgery, depending on what they've had. So it can kind of encourage that behavior as they start to feel better, because it's about a week or so after surgery, I tend to find that most dogs are like, I'm feeling better now, and they want to rush. So if you can utilize that week and get them into a routine of, when I come to your crate, you don't come out until I put your lead on. And then we walk slowly to the door. If they start to rush, you kind of walk back with them. So it gets them into a routine of just waiting and having that patience, so they're not going to hurt themselves. Because they will do, because they're dogs and they're excitable, and we don't want them to rush into anything too much and hurt themselves.
I think this is one of the frustrating things about the situation, is that obviously to go through a big orthopaedic procedure is a big thing, not only because of the anaesthetic, but just because of the actual trauma to that tissue.
Yeah.
And the issue is that if we can't get this actually post-op period right, we can end up ruining all that hard work and all that tissue, and actually almost make it worse than when it was at the beginning.
Yeah. So and you've got a huge infection risk as well, depending on, especially if it's bone surgery. You know, we've got to really look after it. So there's some surgeries where the dogs, they have to be crated and they can't move, because if they move too much, it's going to do that. Others can be on a lead and they can have limited exercise. So it's really trying to help these dogs. And sometimes you can speak to your vets and see if there's any kind of medication that can help just keep them a little bit more on the calmer side for the couple of days to get them into these routines. Because last thing we want is for a frustration burst to happen, and then the dog's really distressed. And if they get too frustrated, we can get redirected aggression, where they just go and just bite whatever is closest to them, because they get so wound up. So doing these exercises with the dogs are really, really important.
I think that's one thing, is just having that communication with your vet, because there are things we can do, or at least try and guide you in the right way, so that really critical period, we at least know if you're struggling, tell us, that we can try and do something for you. Right. The next little bit, obviously, there's all sorts of things we can talk about with regards to trying to manage the pain, and in some ways pain can be a friend, because if there's some pain there, they've got their own little reminder that you shouldn't be doing anything, you shouldn't be overdoing it right now. And once that pain starts to subside, they're going to feel like, this is great now, I can go and do whatever I want. In fact, there's still critical healing period going on. So if you haven't got that preparation time, or been able to gauge what's going on, and you've got a really exuberant dog and they've gone through their initial couple of days of severe pain, and we've managed to get them through that surgery, and they're just starting to get back to themselves, just starting to get a feel of themselves. The wound's not hurting as much now. The joints and the bones are starting to sort themselves out.
Yeah.
Have you got some ideas of things that we can do to keep our dog stimulated and to a certain extent as calm as possible?
Yeah, absolutely. This is where we want to bring out all the kind of sniffing exercises and enrichment boxes. Doing little bits of free work are really good. So examples of this are, I really like enrichment boxes for dogs where essentially a tub, it could be a cardboard box, it could be a plastic box. And what I would do for dogs is I'll go on a walk. I look crazy and not everyone's good at doing this. And I take a bag with me and I basically pick up leaves and twigs and stuff from the walk, especially when I'm out with my other dog. Anything that he found really interesting, I would take a clump of that grass, put it in a bag, and then that would go in a box, and that would then be the enrichment box for my dog that isn't allowed on walks. So I'm kind of bringing the outside world to him, and we'd have 2 or 3 boxes either in the living room start off with and leading into the garden. So we'd have little like enrichment feeding stations.
Yeah.
And this is something that I've heard Amber Batson talk about a bit as well for her dog, because it helps slow down the process of getting outside. It gives them something to sniff, so you get in that enrichment. Sniffing helps to naturally kind of keep dogs a little bit calmer. And if you've got that kind of snuffling sort of sniffing rather than the searching, like the active searcher will kind of keep them a bit more stimulated if they're running around searching for a toy. Whereas the snuffling one helps to keep them a little bit calmer. So they can snuffle around one box, you can then walk to another one, snuffle around that one. And you can hide little bits of things around the garden, but they're really nice ways of bringing the outside world to them, giving them that kind of stimulation, but keeping them calmer so they can walk to one box, have a really good rummage and sniff around, walk to another one. And you don't have to put outside stuff in there. You can also do things where you've got different toys. You can put shredded paper in there. Anything where they just get to have a bit of an investigate is really, really useful. Doing things like free work, so giving them different objects to explore, or doing a few kind of calming shaping games depending on your dog. And because some dogs can kind of see lots of objects and kind of put like a paw on it or move and sniff and interact around them in a calm way. Others will be like a bull in a china shop. So that's where it's really important to know your dog when you interact with these things. But scent work and giving them things to explore, or having a variety of different kind of toys or chews and kind of going, which one do you want to do today, and let them have a little bit of a sniff, pick one up, go and take it away and chew it, and get some really good quality kind of chews. It's like some like dried meats and tails and kind of like the braided chews, things that are going to last a bit longer, that are a bit different, because then it gives them something new and interesting to do that's going to last a little bit longer. Utilizing like licky mats and frozen Kongs and things like that are all really good. But I really like the enrichment boxes because they're really cheap. You can change them every day, and it gives your dog something to look forward to that's just as enriching as a walk, but less kind of effort.
Yeah, I could absolutely see myself doing our usual walk every day without the dog, just picking up bits from their favorite corners.
Yeah, it's because we all
can still have the same experience.
Yeah, and it brings that information back to them, so they look forward to it, and you can pick up different stuff, and just like some grass or leaves, like dogs are going to want to sniff and investigate it, and it's a nice way of giving them that little bit of enrichment, and it's a good mental stimulation thing because they're still getting all the information that they want to. They still have to work through it. It's still a mental stress for them. But a lot of dogs naturally, when they're ill, if you allow them that time to actually calm down and kind of stay out of their heads, they will kind of calm down. We always kind of worry that they're going to start bouncing off the walls. But if you're calm with them and you give them calming exercises to do, and you can sit with them in the meantime and just give them kind of massaging sort of strokes and just allow them to settle down, most dogs will kind of settle down with you. If they're really struggling, then we need to step in and do some training, or see if there's a local trainer that can give you some support. But the majority of them, if you set up the environment in the right way, they'll start to just go, oh, okay, I can breathe, I can relax, I can settle down. This is really nice. I'll have a bit of a sniff here. So they come out of the crate, they do a little bit of a sniff, they go outside to the toilet, you can give them another sniff box, and then you can give them a chew. And that's kind of like the routine. And after the chew, they're usually settled then, and they'll be able to rest with you for the next hour or so sometimes. And then you can do it again and just gradually start to increase the time in between hand.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I'd go for those ones.
Have you had any cases of dogs that are just a little bit crazy? They have so much pent up energy and just don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that?
With those ones, there's usually an underlying cause, and there's generally an anxiety trigger somewhere. If a dog is genuinely unable to switch off to the point where they're just busy all the time, then there's something going on. that's causing that. Either the anxiety is there because they don't know what to do unless they're being told what to do. So unless the owner has physically said, go and lie down in your bed, they're kind of pacing up and down. And they're like, I don't know what to do. I'm feeling a bit irritable. Sometimes if they're a bit of an anxious dog anyway, they'll pace a lot. If they're in pain, they tend to pace a lot. So it's having a look at your dog's lifestyle and how much does your dog rest? How often do they choose to take themselves off and actually settle down? And the ones that don't, when we've kind of looked into it, they've usually got an anxiety issue underneath that we've kind of have to work on beforehand, or they're a noise sensitivity, or there's something going on. And once we kind of address that, sometimes just I speak to the vets and we've had some medication to kind of help, and that's soothed. And once we've kind of got that underlying bit sorted, they can relax really well. So if you find that they're kind of bouncing off the walls, there's usually a reason that they're bouncing off the walls. Because if you look at like street dogs and things, a dog's natural state is they're couch potatoes a lot of the time. It's like they're bred to work when they're working, but in the breaks they can relax. And sometimes we do a bit too much with them. And we love stimulation, it's really good, but sometimes we just take a step back and just give them the opportunity to actually relax. And just have a think about with your dogs, how often do you just leave them to just go and sleep, to go and check out? Are they able to do it? If they're not, have a look at your routine and see if we can figure out why they're not able to switch off.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Right, let me come back because I've got a few questions that come through. Let's head over to one. I'm not sure, I think this is maybe something to do with what we've kind of been through. Are there dogs that if their frustration tolerance is so low as to rule out surgery and possibly make physiotherapy a better choice for them?
Oh, I like that question.
Depends on what's going on, but yeah, that's an interesting question.
Yeah, that's something. Definitely speak to your vet if it's about how time permanent the surgery is. So if it's something where a few months isn't going to matter, then maybe physio build up the muscle a little bit. But if you've got the time to do physiotherapy, you've got the time potentially to do the training.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's having a look at going, if you're not something that's time wise, then get in touch with a behaviourist or a trainer, someone that has an interest or a specialist in helping dogs with crate rest, and have a look at courses, because we do one called If in Doubt Chill Out that's all about this sort of stuff, and there's other people that do similar things out there. So try and find someone that can work with you to prepare your dog for it, because they can all learn frustration tolerance. Even the ones that have the lowest frustration tolerance in the world, they can learn it. It can take time, and it takes months for some of them to actually learn it to the point where they can cope with the 6 to 12 hours of crate rest. But they can do it. So if you're thinking whether physiotherapy is better for them, have a chat to your vet about it. But if you've got the time to do the physio, potentially you've got the time to do the training.
Yeah, brilliant. I think this actually fits in with just whether we need to identify why the dog may be frustrated and won't choose to settle.
Yeah, absolutely. Because frustration is something that tends to come along when a dog feels conflicted, or they're expecting an outcome that they don't get, or they want to do something and they're not able to do it. So if your dog wants to settle and they can't because they're in pain, or they're hungry and they can't get to the water bowl, or they want to play with you and they can't, or they don't know what they're supposed to do in a context and they get frustrated over it. So it's, if you see your dog getting frustrated, we need to figure out why they're getting frustrated so we can deal with it. Because sometimes it's not always a lack of frustration tolerance. Sometimes it's just the environment isn't set up in the right way to allow them to do the things that they need to do. So we want to make sure that those baseline needs are being met first before we do too many kind of behavioral investigations to identify what it is there. And there's getting to the root cause of things. So rather than looking at it and going, they're always barking because they're frustrated, or they're always pacing because they're frustrated, it's but why are they frustrated? And let's have a look at that angle and get to the root cause of that. And that will tend to kind of have like a nice network effect against all their behavior, because if we sort out that underlying cause, it filters through and helps relax the rest of the issues we tend to find.
Yeah, absolutely. Here. Lots of people posting. Some people also got Ed, whose Border Collie Golden Retriever mix is 4 weeks post Tplo. I hope that's going okay, Ed.
Oh wow. Yeah, sometimes you find that once the dogs start to sleep and they're allowed the opportunity to relax, they just keep doing it. And someone's mentioned that sleep is a good thing, and it is. And I think sometimes we expect our dogs to keep wanting to do things and that they're really going to struggle with it. And so many of them that I work with, once they've kind of got past the underlying frustration and they've got the sleep, they're like, oh, I can just switch off and sleep. And they just sail through it. It's once you start to get them outside again, where they start to get excited. And that's where you want to have kind of really short walks and doing kind of sniffy sort of walks. So scattering food on the ground and just do like short 10-minute things. Or even just taking those enrichment boxes that I mentioned and popping them outside the street so they've got something to walk towards and have a sniff, and then something else to walk towards and have a sniff. So you're kind of laying out something. It's the getting to the walk kind of like 4 weeks or so after surgery for most dogs, when they're at the point where they're feeling better, they get to go out on short walks again, but they get so excited.
Yeah.
You want to kind of help them calm down there.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I'm gonna present to you with a fictitious case here. So we've got Fred, who's a chocolate Labrador.
Okay.
He's 2 years old. He's had diagnosed issues with his joints, and he's had an arthroscopy. And he's got another arthroscopy, so a little camera to insert into his leg just to see what's going on in 8 weeks' time. However, so we know there's a degenerative joint issue going on. We know there's an issue with those joints. But he's an absolute lunatic. And everyone is terrified of a slow recovery. He does lapse. He doesn't listen. He's got memory of a goldfish. When he comes into the clinic, he's jumping up. You can barely examine him. And everyone's just really worried about, oh my goodness, how is this dog going to cope potentially with any further procedures or surgery in the future? Where do we go?
Okay. The two places where I would start instantly with a dog like this is, one, I would start to capture any calm behaviors that you see naturally. So the moments where they are just sitting being good, or chewing a toy, or lying down, drop a treat down or something for them, give them a soft stroke, start to kind of reinforce those so they start to be more aware of them and do them more often. Because sometimes with some dogs, we tend to find that if they are very bouncy and hyperactive, the second they stop being bouncy and hyperactive and do something I want them to do, we're like, oh, thank goodness they're not doing this, I'll go and do something else. So we tend to ignore that. So start to capture those calm behaviors. The second thing is I would start doing some delayed gratification with him, which is basically just when you're doing any training, whenever he wants anything, just ask for stillness. So just wait for him to be able to manage himself so he can just stay still for a second, and then give him a treat, whether that's before he's eating, before being let out for a walk, when you're getting the lead on, when you're interacting with him, just any kind of meet and greets. As soon as he just pauses and just gives that stillness, reward that. He doesn't have to sit, he doesn't have to do any kind of waiting. It's just, can you wait? Can you just pause? Can you stop tippy tapping and stop? Fantastic, have a treat. And then can you do that for a second? Fantastic. 2 seconds, fantastic. 3 seconds, and just start to add second by second just duration on any behavior that he does. Can you do this for a little bit longer, and then a bit longer? So he starts to build in, oh, okay, it's the waiting that's getting me what I want. And you kind of have to trick these dogs into thinking it's their idea, which is why it's best to try and not cue them. It's just kind of wait for them to offer you just a pause and then reward it, and then a pause a bit longer and reward it, and just work on that gratification. So you kind of secretly teach them self-control, but they're offering it to you freely. So it's something that they're working on. And if you can do it that way, rather than asking for a sit and then kind of delaying it, because we're asking for it, the dogs aren't really thinking in the same way. Like, you'll get the similar results, but if you kind of just hold back with the treat and just wait for them to pause, they have to think. And they're like, okay, it's the stillness that you're doing. And to get the stillness, the dog has to effectively manage themselves and alterate their breathing and start to calm themselves down and cope with that frustration that we've mentioned so much, to be able to pause in those excitable moments. And then we can start to reward them. And it's a stronger form of learning for a lot of the dogs when you start to capture them in this way, because we're waiting for them to make the right decision and going, great, that's a good choice. And then can we just add a little bit of duration onto that and a bit more? If we can get everyone to do that, so when he comes into the surgery, we'll find that each time he'll come in and they start to kind of tap dance a little bit, rather than he just waiting for that pause. And pause is just such an important thing to try and teach our dogs, is can you just take a step back and just pause? Oh. Back of the cat. Or even kind of teaching some check-ins would be the next thing I go to, is can they start to look at things and look back at you? Are they able to look at something, look back at you? So they're able to kind of look at something, take their attention off it and look back at you. And it's a really simple exercise to teach an auto check-in because you're just rewarding every time they look at you. But it's for them to be able to look at something else, take their attention off that and look back at you is actually huge for a dog to do on their own without asking. Like any of us can kind of speak to our dog and ask for a watch me or a focus. And they'll be like, yeah, okay. But for them to actually watch a dog or a person or a cat or a squirrel and then go, I'm going to choose to take my attention off this exciting thing and back onto mum, they have to show a little bit of self-control to be able to do that. So these are just the subtle little exercises. There are foundation exercises essentially that we want to build in early on. So when they're unsure about what to do, their go-to is either look at you or just pause, rather than jump up and rush and do something else to try and get your attention. I'll just see someone that I know. Hello, Rachel. I think she was on a couple of weeks ago doing a live as well. But that's kind of where I'd want to start with him, is just start to build in these foundation behaviors of getting the dogs to make the right choices themselves rather than us micromanaging them. Because the more we ask them to do stuff, the more they just do what they want until they're told not to. And we kind of want the other way around. We want them to start to think about themselves and learn that they can control themselves and their own environment. And we get a nicer bond there because we're then rewarding them and going, that's great. You've done exactly what I wanted to do. Let's get that pause in. Let's get that calmness in. And we'll start to reward that. And Labradors, because they're so foodie, they'll start to do whatever you want when you get the sausage out. And sometimes I find if you get too high quality food out, especially with Labradors like the one that we're talking about, it tends to increase them and they just go nuts because the food's out. So sometimes doing the opposite of what trainers say and going for the lower quality food, you can still get the rewards in, but it's not as stimulating for them.
Brilliant. So we have a plan anyway for Fred. Okay, so we have another one. We've got Judith. She's an overweight 9-year-old Lhasa Apso. She jumps up at the front door, the kitchen counter, and on and off the sofas, and she hates people passing the window. And she's about to have a steroid epidural for lumbosacral disease. Okay. And she needs to have 4 weeks of complete rest.
Okay.
What do we do?
Okay. First thing is I would get some frosted backing thing for the window.
Yep.
I love this stuff because that way we're just limiting, we're changing the environment essentially. So a lot of this is setting up the environment to make it as easy as possible for her to make the right choices and reduce the chance of her getting it wrong and hurting herself. So if we can block off the windows, so either use the frosted glass or get some blinds, or if you can't afford it, greaseproof paper is really, really good to just stick on your windows. It has the same effect and it's a lot cheaper because then she's not going to see these people walking past. So that's one less thing to help stimulate her. If they're jumping up, this is where leads really come in handy, because the leads you can use to get them to sit and you can control it. So when people come into the house, you can have her at a distance so she's not getting close enough to jump up. And we can start to work on that pause that we mentioned. And pause, they don't have to sit. It's a stand is fine. Just 4 paws on the floor. We can start to reward those for. For a lot of dogs that like to jump up, I like to teach them a stop. And the stop is just where you kind of throw food at your dog. So you kind of throw it towards them and they start to catch it. You aim to either get them to catch it or throw it just behind them. It's a really fun thing to teach. And if you kind of throw it a bit like a dart, so as soon as you raise your hand, you'll find that after a few repetitions of throwing it, because they're anticipating the food, they'll pause. So for visitors and people coming in, if they can have some treats as she's walking towards them, they can put their hand up, she's going to stop because she's got that expectation. And then you can throw the treat or drop a few treats on the floor. And then while she's hoovering those up, it helps to kind of calm her down and get that excitement out. So it reduces the chance of her wanting to jump up because she's got someone cueing her to stop. She's also got a lead. So if she makes it wrong, she physically can't get to them to jump up. So we're kind of managing those situations if we don't have the time to actually teach her anything better beforehand.
Brilliant. Okay. I've got an interesting question. I just saw, where was it?
Oh,
Any advice on how to calm a dog that usually lives in a larger group of dogs? And this person has put 10.
Wonderful. Okay. Are we calming the dog away from the other dog so the dog's stressed and wanted to get back to the other dog? Or are we trying to keep the whole group calm because this one dog has surgery?
They haven't specified.
Because
I would imagine that we really need to keep them away, really.
Yeah,
so you just can't control.
I'm assuming
variables in that group.
Yeah, I'm assuming this situation, it's a dog that is kind of getting worked up because they're separated from the group. In which situation, try and give them, as if they have like a friend within that group, sometimes having one dog separate and having like a friend or something that can come and join them and be like their support dog. So we can give our dog their own emotional support dog, so they've got a little bit of company, so they can lie next to the cage, or you can have them on lead. The main thing is when you've got a dog coming in for company, when you first do it, have them both on leads. Ideally the house lines, so they're a little bit lighter and they're different to the outdoor leads, so they can both start. And if they start to get a bit excited, you've got the control then of stopping them from getting too wound up, and have it utilizing like your chews and rest breaks and things, so they can be calm together. Just bear in mind, if you are using chews in multiple dogs, to make sure there's no guarding issues in between hands, because we don't want a fight on top of something else. But in those situations, if you have the notice, start doing kind of separation training with your dogs and get them all used to being away from each other individually for a bit beforehand. Because when you've got large groups of dogs, they like to be around each other. They're a very social species. So it very much depends on what your group dynamics are like and how much the rest of the group like to settle. If you've got quite a chilled out group where you've got dogs just lounging on the sofas all day, but there's no reason really to separate that one dog from the group, because they're all quite a relaxed group. If the ones that like to jump around and play all the time, then you might need to. So I would have a look at the group dynamics in total and see, is separation absolutely necessary for this dog, or can we manage the groups as a whole, or give them like a little bit of pen or a friend, is where I kind of start off with. But without knowing more, I can't give too much.
That's really helpful. I think, to be honest, the alternative is managing 10 dogs.
Yeah.
And you can't separate them, is a bit that's going to be a whole different kettle of fish.
Yeah.
So I just came up with a couple of questions, actually.
Okay.
So if we had a situation where you either, there's two kind of ways of looking at this. So if you are at work all day, your dog's had surgery, your aim and your the way you're going to go down this route is to restrict their movement, unfortunately. So that's going to be more of looking toward a pen or a crate for that period in which you're not going to be able to be there to limit them and monitor what they're doing. Is there any tips you've got for just trying to get them used to having to stay in it for that period, if you've not got the period to prepare them for it? Is it going to be a case of just making sure they've got plenty of things to use in that space, or using a smaller room so they don't have to necessarily just be inside that crate, but a smaller restricted area? How would you go with
depending
that?
on the size of your dog? If you've got quite a small dog, sometimes utilizing kind of puppy pens, and kind of having like a longer kind of gate, so they've got a bigger area to roam around, or a smaller room of the house, so they're still restricted, but they've still got a little bit of free movement. Because we need to be really careful when they're on their own, if they are restricted in crates and things, because sometimes they can get things stuck. And at your vet, I'm sure you've seen the injuries that can happen when a dog panics when they're in confinement. So we need to make sure that they've got lots of things that they can occupy themselves with, to help them relax. But ultimately, it's how well they can cope with being on their own. So if you've got a dog that's very much used to being on their own and they don't have any separation related behaviors, they tend to be okay with it. They might be a bit unsure at first because they're not feeling very well and they'll be a bit sorry for themselves. If you've got a dog that does have a separation related problem, then we really need to address that beforehand, because if they do any panic while they've had surgery and no one's there, then there's a lot of potential dangers that can happen there. So we want to have a look on how well the dog can relax on their own when you're not there, and try and address that and build up their ability to relax just in general, and really start to work. Sorry, my dog's just come prancing in the room.
Okay. The other situation is if you're lucky enough to be at home with them, and I know some people won't manage to do this, because we do have people that arrange their dogs to have surgery and then have a period of time off afterwards. And if that's the case, the temptation is to try and keep them as busy as possible, to keep their minds as busy as possible. The way I would deal with that would be to have a structure to the day. So rather than just going, have a Kong, have another Kong, have another chew, Right, what can we do? Let's get enrichment boxes out. Is to have a structure to that day. So having a plan for the morning, you know, your breakfast time, something to give some interaction and throughout the day. Would you use that sort of technique?
Absolutely.
Structure?
Yeah, because most dogs you'll find they'll have a little bit of a structure to the day. Most dogs, you know that around kind of like 11 o'clock they'll have a nap, and then there'll be a longer nap at like 3 o'clock, and then they'll have another. Like a lot of them, dogs like to nap. So if you can have a think about what your general dog's kind of activity schedule is like before surgery, we can kind of try and maintain that. So we come down for breakfast, we have a little bit of an enrichment or something, and then we chill out and we relax and do something. And then it gets to lunchtime, we kind of go out to the toilet, we do something else, and then we relax. So they get into the habit of doing a little bit of something and they're relaxing, a little bit of something and relaxing. So rather than kind of it being scattered, we want it to try and.
Oh, I just lost you for a second. Bear with us, people. No, I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
That's okay. How about now?
Oh, yeah, you're back. There you go.
So my dog just leaned on my microphone, didn't you?
Brilliant.
Yeah. So we want to kind of give them a little bit of routine, because predictability reduces anxiety. So if they can roughly predict what's going to happen, it can help, and it helps to set their expectations, which again can help reduce frustrations, because they'll know, well, if I wait a little bit, I'll get to go out and do this, or I'll get a toy at this point. Whereas if we kind of scatter it around and mix it up a bit much, that can lead to a few more problems, because then they'll be like, well, I want something now. Yeah. So I would very much agree that kind of having a little bit of a routine for them, so they get used to it, and they could then learn to wait until the next time you come and let them out. And I found my own dog, he settled into the routine really quickly, and he'd go back into his pen. We got one of the kind of fabric round pens, so he had a little bit of space, so he would be in that for nap times, and then we'd let him out into his little play area for a bit of enrichment time, and then he'd go back in for a nap time, and we'd kind of do that, and he got into a really good routine, and we never had any kind of arguments over going back in. We'd just be like, okay, nap time now, and he'd just go in, he'd curl up and go back to sleep. And it was really nice to get him into that routine. And some dogs will do it really well, because a lot of them do like routine. So I would definitely try and do that, rather than, oh, I'm at home, so I'll just keep giving you distractions. Because the more we distract them, the less they're able to actually switch off, because they're just waiting for the next distraction. And sometimes they just need that time to be able to take a step away and just relax and be bored. And, you know, boredom's a thing. We all have to deal with it. And our dogs have to live with it as well. And it's okay for your dog to be bored for a couple of hours. It's not going to kill them. And sometimes I see a lot of clients where the dog being bored for a couple of hours is like the end of the world. I'm like, no, it's fine. It's a learning thing. They have to learn to be able to cope with boredom. And the better they are to cope with it, the easier all of these surgeries and recovery will be, because it reduces their frustration, because they can cope with being bored in the first place. They're not always looking for something to do to avoid the feeling of boredom.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I agree. Right, that's the last bit I've got on my sheet. Let's have a little look, see if I've got any other questions in here. Got some other people recovering. Oh yeah, Ed says that their dog is doing better than he is. A little bit of stress going on in that household, I feel. This is an interesting question. Has anyone on the event had a Tplo fail? So it's probably open to lots of people. If so, I'd be interested in linking up compare notes. So yeah, so this is someone who unfortunately has gone for surgery, and for whatever reason, and obviously the thing is with these surgeries is that there are hundreds of different causes for them to fail. It may not be related to arrest, it may be related to post-op infection, it may be related to pre-existing issues with the joint or the area that's affected, or all sorts. But if you've gone through that, you're probably going to be even more acutely aware of all these issues and trying to prevent it from failing again. I think we've pretty much covered everything. And obviously, I think it's just going through again those steps, going back a step, having a look at what you did the last time, and just coming up with a plan and probably a structure for trying to take off reasons for them to fail.
And it's just so important to get to know your dog first, because there's no kind of one size fits all. We have to know what the emotional levels of your dog are, what they can and can't cope with. And once you know that, it makes it easier for you to plan and start to prepare them for future surgeries, or go, okay, you definitely can't cope with this, so we're going to have to just manage it and change the environment to avoid you being in that situation. And it's not easy for a lot of our dogs, but the more we can teach them to manage themselves and to work through these things, the easier it is, because it's less for us to have to keep asking them to do stuff. And they've got that element of control, which just helps to calm them down, because they're able to go, okay, I can choose to calm down, and I'm just going to go and pick up my chew and relax myself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the key points, is just that there's going to be a way to deal with this. I think if you're in this situation and you've either got an animal which is potentially about to have surgery, or in the process of the initial recovery, is if you're struggling, talk to someone, call your vet, speak to someone, speak to a behaviourist, because there's going to be a structure to try and make your life a little bit easier during this process. And yeah, as we've said this evening, there's lots of different things which will, it's not one size fits all.
Yeah,
we know that. But there's usually a way we can try and make this easier for you.
Yeah.
One little bit down. I've got a behaviour question on here.
Oh,
lovely. About boredom. This doesn't seem to be an acceptable way for a dog to be. Surely, if they're getting the right enrichment, this should lead to contentment and natural need to rest or sleep. I guess what I'm trying to ask is, doesn't boredom lead to frustration?
Absolutely, it does. Because boredom is an aversive state, and being in that state leads to frustration because they want to get out of it as soon as possible. But there are some situations, and when you've got dogs post-surgery, because you can't give them the amount of support and enrichment that a lot of them will need to be content, they have to be okay with boredom. And there's a fine line between content and boredom. Some dogs, they'll be bored first, and then they'll go, okay, fine. Similar to children. They'll be bored for a little bit, they'll get frustrated, and then they'll find something else to do to relieve that boredom, and then you've got a content. So they have to be able to work through that boredom. All dogs are going to feel that element of boredom at some point. We don't want to have long-term boredom where they've got nothing to do all day. The boredom comes from, I don't know what to do, I'm feeling a bit bored, I need something to do. Do they then have the skills to go, I'm going to go and chill out, or I'm going to go and pick up my chew and self-soothe for a little bit. Now I'm nice and content, I can sleep. So that's kind of what I mean, is dogs need to learn to be able to cope with boredom. When they start to feel it, they know how to feel with it, and they know how to get themselves out of it without starting to go, I'm feeling bored, oh my God, mom, dad, help me, and then just start barking and pawing and jumping up or stealing things, because they don't know how else to get rid of that feeling. So the more we can teach them to chill out and relax and build up that kind of predictability in the routines, it helps them to cope better with the boredom, because the dogs on crate rest are going to be bored at some point. We can't avoid boredom with these dogs, but we can teach them to cope with it. And if they're able to cope with it a little bit before the surgery, it makes it a lot easier. Because we do want a contented dog, but they're going to be bored before they get content. Right. I hope that made some sense.
Yeah, no, I think it did. I think that answers the question. I think we've pretty much answered questions on here. I mean, that's it. And I found it really interesting. And I've for example, the enrichment box idea, I'm definitely going to be using that 100%. It's a great way to give them that experience when they can't.
Yeah. I love that with my dogs, and it was really nice to see other behaviourists and vets offering similar advice. And to be honest, I don't know who, I think it's something that a lot of us just started doing because we had dogs that had surgery around the same time. And I was just out on a walk and my dog was doing like, oh, that seems really, I'm going to take that back. And then he really enjoyed it. And we would just have, so when I'd buy like a bunch of new chews, I'd just put them all in a box. And I'd be like, here you go, which one do you want? And then he would just have a sniff and rummage around, and then he'd pick a particular one, and that was him done for the day. And I just find that bringing the outside world to them is really important. It's something that you can do with any dog on crate rest or senior dogs that can't necessarily get out as much as they used to.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for this evening, Danielle. It's been
you're so welcome.
Really, really helpful, and it's been lovely having you, and hopefully we'll have you back again in the future. Hopefully you've all found it useful. Obviously, if you have questions, please keep posting on them. We'll try and keep an eye on it for you, and try and answer what we can. I think, as I said to you before, if you're worried, talk to someone, ask your vet, ask your clinical behaviourist. We'll try our best to help you out through this really difficult period. I just want to say one last thank you to Big Barker for sponsoring us. Have a little look on their website if you're interested. And yeah, I think that's everything.
Lovely.
Thanks so much, guys.
Everyone. Thank
See
you
you
for
later.
joining me.